Hey everybody, TacticAngel here, back on the PlayStation 4 for a review of a premium ship in World of Warships Legends. This time we'll be talking about the Imperial Japanese cruiser, Yahagi. As usual, we'll start out with some history, then we'll move into some analysis, talk about the commanders, look at your stats, and finally finish off with a bit of gameplay. And if you do want to skip around to any part of this, you should see some time codes down there in the description. The Yahagi is the third of 4 Agano-class light cruisers built for the Imperial Japanese Navy. The Agano-class cruisers were a follow-on design after learning much from the interwar Yubari design. Design work for this class would begin in 1936, and if this ship, featuring only 6 6-inch guns, seems fairly lightly armed and armored, you would be correct. The primary purpose of these cruisers was intended as flotilla leaders, which is why they featured an impressive 35-knot top speed, light armor, and a relatively light main battery armament. In a way, this sort of design is something like the middle ground between the approach that the British did, which was building some extra-large versions of their destroyers for each of their destroyer classes to serve as flotilla leaders, and the Americans' initial thoughts behind their design of the Atlanta-class light cruisers. The Agano-class ships would start construction in 1940, prior to American involvement in World War II, though a little more than 3 years after the start of the Second Sino-Japanese War. Though the Japanese initially wanted to order a baker's dozen of these things, material limitations would limit the orders to just 4, and by the time any of them made it into service, the Japanese had already faced a decisive defeat at Midway, the early turning point in the Pacific War. Laid down in November 1941, the Yahagi was launched in October 1942, and was only finally commissioned into service in the last few days of December of 1943. After a brief workup period, she sailed as part of the screening force for the 1st Carrier Strike Force and straight into the Battle of the Philippine Sea. This battle famously went pretty poorly for the Japanese Navy, particularly for their increasingly obsolete aircraft, piloted by increasingly brave, but also increasingly inexperienced pilots, with the battle being known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot for American sailors. Though not contributing to any offensive measures and sustaining no damage herself, she assisted in rescuing 570 crewmen who escaped the carrier Shokaku, which had been torpedoed by an American submarine, the USS Kavala. Returning briefly to port, she picked up some additional anti-aircraft batteries, and as far as I can tell, counting them by hand, this is the version of the ship that we see in the game. Following that, she set out to screen Krida's battleships at the Battle of Leyte Gulf, which included the Yamato. Here, Yahagi tangled with a much more famous set of destroyers, leading a torpedo run against the infamous task force Taffy 3. This particular engagement went so poorly for the Imperial Japanese Navy that it almost defies explanation, losing 3 heavy cruisers and 3 more damaged in the encounter, not to mention the loss of additional ships not present at the Battle of Samar in particular, which would include 3 battleships and 4 carriers of different sorts. Officially, Kurita claims that he was driving off to look for other ships to sink, though the ferocity of the defense offered by U.S. destroyers, the USS Johnston, Hull, and Heermann, and the minor detail that Kurita gave every indication that he thought he was engaging fleet carriers rather than escort carriers, there are a lot of Americans who will press X for doubt on that. In any case, after Leyte, Kurita was removed from command, and the Yahagi was sent back to Japan for refit, where she would stay until April 1945. By this point, Americans were invading Okinawa, some of the southernmost islands that make up modern-day Japan. At that point, the Imperial Japanese Navy dreamed up Operation 10 Go, a fanciful/suicidal plan for the Yamato to ride into glory by beaching herself on Okinawa and becoming something of an armored artillery base until she ran out of shells. In any case, such a peculiar plan was obviously destined for failure, if the Yamato didn't have suitable escort, so Yahagi sortied with several destroyers alongside the massive battleship. Shortly after noon on April 7th, Yamato and her fleet were attacked by waves of American aircraft. Yahagi was struck in the initial attack by a torpedo that hit her engine room. This killed the entire engineering crew and caused the ship to drift to a halt. Over the course of the next hour and a half, she was hit by a dozen bombs, half a dozen more torpedoes, after which she rolled to starboard and sank beneath the waves, being one of 6 ships that Japan lost that day, including the legendary Yamato. The Yahagi is just the 3rd premium Tier 4 cruiser in the game, which is kind of surprising. Arguably the least powerful among these 3 ships, the others being the Marblehead and Krasny Krem, it's also the ship that has the most tricks to play, at least at such a low tier, and would generally encourage players to really think about what they're doing if they want any level of success in this boat. When looking at the upsides of the Yahagi, she has a great range with her torpedoes. In fact, I don't think you can make their range any shorter than your base sea detectability, even if you were to try, which is a very rare thing to find at any tier in a cruiser without having to be accused of throwing games just because you're playing an Italian ship. It's nice, as Wargaming points out, that if you do manage to hit something, the Yahagi torpedoes individually do a lot of damage. In fact, they're the highest damage torpedoes for any cruiser below the Miyoko, and even with an extra 2 kilometers of range over that ship. The Yahagi gives you the opportunity to exercise more map control than most cruisers by being both reasonably fast and having decent concealment. The French will still be faster, and the Italians will be both faster and more concealed, but helping you in the speed department is a nice collection of toys. Though you can very easily feel the resemblance between the Yahagi and Yubari, not everyone's favorite ship, in this case you actually come in with sonar, like most cruisers, a catapult fighter, and a speed boost. This further helps you to move around the battlefield without being harassed and play those objectives better than most cruisers can that you'll face. On the flip side, the Yahagi, like the Yubari, is a very delicate flower, possessing a modest hit point pool and no armor in most places, and exactly the wrong amounts of armor in others. The ship is unfortunately prone to sudden and catastrophic existence failures when confronted with accurate battleship fire from almost any angle, so a combination of wise positioning and active dodging will be required to keep the Yahagi in action for the full duration of the match. Add to that rather middling main battery firepower and a relatively slow turret traverse, which may occasionally really hamper you in your ability to fight off your enemies while also trying to preserve your fragile ship. And again, similar to Yubari, the torpedo angles on this ship are basically unworkable in most close quarters scenarios, because they're more or less shooting straight to the side and barely an inch forward or backwards. In a situation where you're thinking that you need to go full broadside in a pinch to try to get those torpedoes out there before you die, death will unfortunately most often precede this happening. Also of some note, they do take a long time to reload, so what you should take away from this is that the long range and your good stealth and these other disadvantages means that your torpedoes are really best used as area denial weapons for predictive shots and from other locations where your enemies are not expecting you to be. And with all of this taken into account, what does this ship sound like? If you said bad, I'd probably disagree with you, because the Yahagi is neither an incredibly strong or an incredibly weak ship. The Yahagi is, though, in my opinion, probably one of the best ships to learn how to practice smart, high-level cruiser play in, and one where you can do it in the relative comfort of Tier 4, rather than the comparatively punishing prospect of trying to hone these skills in Tier 6, 7, or what we call not 8. When choosing a commander, you're going to find that you have 3 flavors of effective. I'm sure the most favorite Japanese cruiser commander out there is Yamamoto. The best thing I think that he has going for him is the improved range for Yahagi. The Yahagi is capable of HE spam and possesses reasonable accuracy. Staying as far away from battleships as possible is definitely an effective survival tactic and offers you more time to try to actually dodge. Though you're unlikely to get too many opportunities, your guns are perfectly capable of punching other cruisers with AP at short ranges, but like most Japanese ships, you'll find this ship is more comfortable sticking to high explosive, except for shots of opportunity. most of which should be because you're forced into that situation rather than one that you've gone looking for, given this ship's vulnerability and very real chance that you're going to be working with the worst gun agility that you can find in the Yahagi when using Yamamoto. In my opinion, Mikawa is probably a better fit for the Yahagi though, since reducing your own visibility will improve your stealth torpedo gap in a way that a longer ranged main battery simply won't, and you get that for free with Mikawa's base trait. If you use him, I would highly suggest using Ingenious to not only give you an idea of how much trouble you're in by telling you how many people are aiming at you, but also because your turrets will feel pretty decent with a little extra WD-40 that this provides. His other abilities are going to also improve your speed, survivability, and agility, and they're all potentially reasonable choices. The one real downside of this suggestion is that it limits any improvement of your offensive capabilities to whatever you've chosen for your inspirations. And not that I'm specifically a contrarian or anything, but I actually really enjoyed Togo in this ship for a couple of reasons. For one, you can really go all in on stealth, and you can get detectability of this ship down to something in the area of 8.5 kilometers, which, like earlier, this has some pretty great advantages. Alternatively, you can run with both improved fire chance and improved turret traverse, which can be useful. Also, you have access to Unstoppable, which is normally a destroyer skill, but considering that you're a light cruiser that relies on speed and maneuverability to keep yourself in the game, this actually can offer you some decent peace of mind. Unfortunately, Togo's slot 3 and 4 choices, while not bad, aren't exactly something to write home about. And as we move into stats, we're going to be talking about the Yahagi versus the average because the only other Japanese ship at this tier has 8-inch guns rather than 6. So let's just get to it. The Yahagi has 25,700 hit points, which is 900 below the average right now. This is a little worrying as you look at the armor profile, and even if you don't completely understand what this is trying to tell you, it's pretty clear that it says to most people that you're going to take a lot of damage. To add a little clarity, what this 13mm bow is telling you is that you can bounce destroyer AP and other light cruiser AP. The same story with the blue on the side. Where the damage starts to accumulate quickly is because of the typical Japanese citadel that rises well above the waterline, and is pretty exposed to any battleship shells coming from the front or the back of your armor. At any angle where this 25mm plate on the inside can roll a bounce versus a battleship shell, you're probably also not showing an auto bounce angle from your main belt. And this plate on your side seems to be just perfectly thin enough to not offer you much protection from penetrations, while also being just thick enough to ensure that any shell that does penetrate you isn't going to get all the way through your ship. This is where you would do well to not be seen, play at range, or dodge. And while much of this may seem grim, it's pretty much true for any cruiser at the tier, and sometimes even worse. When we come to main battery, you do have 3 turrets with 2 152mm guns each, giving you the lightest main battery loadout at the tier. This actually does translate out to you having the second lowest AP DPM, but your HE DPM is pretty much middle of the pack with this 2600 HE shell damage. Since the Yahagi also has the second best fire chance of any cruiser at the tier, that's a pretty good reason to stay on HE until a really good opportunity presents itself. They range out to a lackluster 13.5 kilometers, which is about 200 meters shorter than your average for cruiser range. Though you have a good reload at just 9 seconds, you do have the second slowest turret traverse of any cruiser at the tier, shared with several others, behind only the Furutaka with its extremely large guns. But guns aren't your only weapons. You come with 2 quadruple launchers mounted right down the center line, allowing them to be fired to either side of the ship, albeit at extremely limited angles. The fantastic news here is the 17,233 damage and 12-kilometer range is not only good for Tier 4, but would be good even at Tier 7. The not so good news here is that this 2-minute torpedo reload is pretty long, and the 1.6 kilometer detectability is fairly noticeable for torpedoes that are only relatively average in speed. What this boils down to is you're going to end up with a 2-kilometer range advantage, a 10% torpedo speed advantage, and deal an extra 3,700 damage per torpedo versus the next longest range torpedoes in the game, and you don't even have to play an Italian ship in order to get it. This gives the Yahagi an unmatched area denial potential for any Tier 4 cruiser. In terms of maneuverability, the Yahagi is decently fast, coming in at just 35 knots. Its turning circle is 690 meters, and it has the best rudder shift at the tier with 5.1 seconds. Overall, the maneuverability for Yahagi is very good for a cruiser at the tier, with my only caveat being that it does take a little bit of time to get her up to speed. When looking at concealment, you do have 10.6 kilometer sea detectability with 6.4 detectability from air. If you are firing your guns from smoke, you have 4.8 kilometer detectability, and all of these are relatively good. In fact, it's pretty much the third best concealment, behind only the English and the Italians. And when combined with her reasonable speed, is one of the great strengths of this particular ship. Then finally, we have some consumables. Unsurprisingly, you do come with a hydroacoustic search. This is relatively normal with the same range and duration as what you'll find on ships like the Omaha or Furutaka, but you also do have a plane and a speed boost. Unlike most planes that come on cruisers, this is actually a battleship duration fighter aircraft, which means it's only going to be in the air for about a minute and a half, unless it gets shot down. While it's definitely an advantage to have the plane, it is a bit of a disadvantage to have such a short duration on it. The speed boost is also nice. It's your standard 8% speed boost for 2 minutes, and in addition to your already pretty good speed, is really nice to have when you really need to get across the battlefield. And as promised, we're going to finish off with a bit of gameplay. We're going to be on Trident, and as the game gets started here, I am going to go ahead and put my commander up on the screen. As you can see, we're using Haihachiro Togo. We have a strange collection of choices here and inspirations. And we'll draw your attention briefly to Unstoppable. I actually do really like this ability on this ship, just to make sure that you can maneuver when you need to, because getting your stuff knocked out in this ship is actually fairly common. And I guess I do want you guys to know I do actually test this stuff out. So, as this game starts out, I go the same direction I almost always go. This is probably not the best place in the world to go in a cruiser, but we're hoping to get out here before we get spotted and across this gap. They're going full ham, it looks like already. This is bad news for me. There's no chance I'm going to become unspotted, so I might as well put some damage out there while I try to get into position. Thankfully, this destroyer in front of me has left a smoke screen. That is actually going to be really convenient for me because it allows me to more or less play like the very, very big destroyer that I am. Oh look, he's even helped me slow down. Now, as you can see here, we have switched over to AP. This is about the maximum range where you'd expect AP to really be worth giving it a shot. And of course, we come away with one really good hit and another that makes us think we probably should have just stuck with the HE. Of course, if you add those both together, it actually came out to be a pretty good choice either way. Now, I have activated my hydroacoustic, which is one of the things that's missing from the Yubari that really does make everybody kind of hate that ship. That and the fact that it is fragile and it only has 2 guns. There's a lot of issues with the Yubari, let's just say that. But the Yahagi, in spite of feeling a lot like the Yudachi, doesn't suffer the same sort of consumable problems. Now, as we move up, we are happy to try to support our teammate in taking out that Jaguar. Unfortunately, he gets torpedoed. It looked a little bit like he might have been trying to do the old manual torpedo. Unfortunately, this smoke screen seemed to get in his way. I'm thinking, you know, maybe this smoke screen's going to be a nice thing for me. And if it weren't for the fact there was only 2 seconds left, maybe it would have been. Unfortunately, I am spotted. You can see here the not exactly fantastic torpedo arcs. We happen to be turning out anyway. And though we were mostly firing down the line there, we do have extraordinary range, and I think a lot of people are going to be surprised at just how far these torpedoes can go. He's at, what, pretty close to 8 kilometers. I think he was beyond 8 kilometers when I fired, even if he maneuvers a little bit away. We're still going to have plenty of range. And a lot of times when you're using the Yahagi, if you see someone else kind of moving towards a corner, it's a really nice ship to be able to put torpedoes all the way out there. Beyond 10 kilometers oftentimes when you're not actually spotted, as long as you're not shooting your guns, and maybe surprise somebody who's taken a corner a little too aggressively. Looks like we have left this Omaha with just the slightest little bit of hit points. We make sure to have the HE loaded because honestly, if we hit him anywhere, we ought to be able to finish him off. Playing the middle of the map, probably not generally what you want to do in this ship, but then again, it doesn't look like anybody on the other team wants to play the middle of the map, or actually pay much attention to me whatsoever, so we're going to keep going with it. You can imagine what I felt when I managed to land 2 shells on a ship that had 1 hit point or something and didn't manage to kill it. But, yeah, it happens. Confronted with a Kirov, we know he is a light-ish cruiser. He actually has 180mm guns, but still can't get through the front of the ship. If he sticks with AP like that, we stand a pretty good chance of bouncing most of the shells. We are going to go ahead and give him HE in return because I have no idea what his bow armor is. As you can see, it works. You know, you do pretty consistent damage to cruisers at this tier. He has decided to stick to it, it looks like. And in spite of being really, really poorly armored, we are actually weathering this storm pretty well. The 9-second reload on this ship, like I said, pretty fast. And we do manage to get enough damage out there that he doesn't get all the way around to torpedo us. As you can imagine, there's no way that I would have been able to turn all that far in order to get my torpedoes around on him without really giving away the entire side of my ship. Now, if this Marblehead really wants to punish me, he might be able to do it from there. I may actually have enough armor to shatter 1 or 2 shells, but I kind of doubt it. But we'll still count this one up as having a little bit of luck. I certainly don't blame a Marblehead for wanting to shoot as much HE as physically possible, considering just the total volume of fire that thing gets. Obviously, he has switched over to AP. He's not coming away with a whole lot of anything at this point. Well, that's a little bit better. And as he gets closer, we do manage to finally finish him off. Getting in running gun battles with cruisers, not always the wisest idea. If I really wanted to mitigate the damage, and not play up the fact that I started with twice as many hit points as he did, I probably would have just bowed in to him. I still end up with 2/3 of my total damage output that way, but that would probably invite a lot of HE, or it should, and the Marblehead would find no difficulty doing damage like that. In any case, we are going to go on to win the game, mostly because I'm not super interested in sailing all the way out there and trying to find that guy who's, as far as I can tell, right up on the Jean Barriere, and of course I imagine my teammates are going to capture the base anyway. So closing thoughts on Yahagi. I'm going to repeat, I do like this ship. In games where you get to use a lot of your consumables, she does have pretty much all the right tools to actually play an impactful role moving across the battlefield. In this particular game, we were mostly looking, unfortunately, just at the guns and torpedoes and such. You are very lightly armored. You are going to have to pay attention to that stuff, just like pretty much any other Tier 4 cruiser, arguably even more so. The Omaha Marblehead, I could have punched him with AP through the front, but still a fun ship. I do think that if you play this ship a lot, it will make you a better player, as you get better at the ship. It's going to give you the kind of mental mindset that is really helpful in Tier 7 and in Legendary tier games. Plus, it doesn't feel like a really cheap ship for a player to be loading into a Tier 4 game with. So I like it. I know a lot of people probably aren't going to like it, but as the dude says, that's just like your opinion, man. In any case, I do want to thank you all for watching this video. Hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you on the next one.